Hi, and welcome to Numerix Video Blog. I'm Jim Jocko, your host. With me today, Mike Opel, evangelist, cloud evangelist, if you will, from Microsoft. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What is a cloud evangelist?
I'm still trying to figure that one out as myself. So a cloud evangelist, we're going around trying to dispel some rumors and myths about cloud and really help people become early adopters and use cloud for a competitive advantage.
Okay, so very good question. 64%, as purported in a recent IDC survey, says financial services are looking at hybrid clouds as their early adopter use. What is a hybrid cloud?
So hybrid cloud is kind of a middle step in between owning your own gear and running a large infrastructure and leveraging a Microsoft Azure cloud or whatever sort of cloud. So a private cloud enables you to still have control over your assets, but then also leverage the massive compute powers and things that are available through the cloud.
And what use cases are we starting to see in terms of that type of adoption?
I think there are kind of two kind of paths for use cases so far. One is storage and backup, which is kind of an easy, logical progression to cloud. People have massive amounts of data in storage that they have to have for regulatory purposes. It's very easy to migrate those towards a cloud environment and really recognize significant cost savings, as well as the ability to get that data very quickly for regulatory purposes. So that's kind of one area. And the other area we see it is in terms of massive compute. So as people burst to cloud, so as you're going to be running large algorithms, large models, the ability to elevate that up into the cloud, run that incredibly large job, and get results in real business time. That's really, I think, where we're kind of seeing the two most applications of cloud so far.
Now, I think a lot of people on our blog are unfamiliar, right, in terms of the term of infrastructure as a service, that distributed calculation. Is that just a big system? Is that something we don't touch? Is that in Excel? Because we see Excel so much being prominent within, still in the front office and trading operations.
So I think infrastructure as a service is one of those things that means a lot of things to different people. In the ideal world, infrastructure as a service is exactly what it says, where you're able to really outsource that function of infrastructure to a provider who's probably a little better at it than you might be. That's kind of the ideal end game. But what I think is nice about hybrid cloud is you don't have to go there from where you are today. You can kind of migrate there over time, and as you're comfortable with the applications and the data you want to put there, you can do that in a gradual case. One thing I would say about that, the IDC study, which I thought was interesting, it didn't really surprise me that financial services is really an early adopter for the cloud. And the reason being is financial services is really all about the search for alpha, right? Everyone's always been, our entire industry is built around finding alpha. And I think savvy firms are recognizing that if they can utilize the compute and the capacity that cloud brings, it's really going to give them a greater chance to get alpha versus their peers. And those who get there first are going to have a significant advantage over those who don't. So I think that's kind of one of the interesting, fun things about being in this place right now.
But I think one of the challenges is how are you bringing operations all together within the infrastructure, right, to achieve different regulatory hurdles, and and then take advantage of that capacity within that time frame. Are there any particular interesting use cases as it relates to regulation or changing regulations, whether it's Dodd-Frank or Basel III globally?
So it's funny, when you talk about global regulations, I was in Germany a couple weeks ago, and their regulations, we like to think it's difficult here in the States, but their regulations are incredibly challenging there, where everything has to stay within the borders of Germany. It's just very, very rigorous regulations. And I think one of the challenges that I've always seen people when it comes to risk and regulations is people tend to chase a regulation. They're chasing Dodd-Frank, or they're chasing Basel II, Basel III, whatever it might be. Everyone's always chasing that next reg. And I think that's a mistake. I think the best practice there is to say we recognize we're going to have the ability to create reports for regulators in very, very short order time. We have to store tremendous amounts of records and have access to them almost immediately. And when you start thinking about how to build a flexible architecture that can enable that, rather than chasing a specific reg, I think it's a better business case. And I think that's what I see at least some savvy firms in Europe doing, where they use cloud where appropriate to be able to do that, but not, again, not chasing individual regulations, because as you know, they're constantly changing, but really the big picture of providing regulators with almost real-time now access to data doesn't change. I think if you focus on that as opposed to a specific reg, you'll be better off in your business.
Now we talk about Basel III and Dodd-Frank a lot in this video blog, but when you say Germany, I think data privacy rules. And I see Canada's coming out probably next year. EU has come out with new privacy rules as well, and seeing some Asian countries. How are you? I'm sure you're getting this question all the time as a potential barrier to cloud adoption. What should we know about data privacy and Azure?
So I think so I'll tell you, when I think about data privacy in Azure, I'll kind of I think one of the best practices that I've seen, quite honestly, even though it sounds self-serving, is Microsoft itself. Microsoft itself is very much of a cloud-based environment, and we're a globally dispersed company having to work in multiple regulations all the time, right? And the way Microsoft thinks about security is not really the old sense of security where like you keep things in a locked file case and people have a key to get in and at night you lock the door. But rather we think about it in terms of access. Because everyone needs access to information at different points during the day. So for example, I'm not in a Microsoft office today. I'm at your office. I'm still working and I need the important documents and data that I need to do my job right here all the time. So we have to think about it in terms of access. So at Microsoft, we think about who should have access to things. What things should they have access to, and then how do we determine what devices they're having access on? So for example, I have access on my mobile device to a tremendous amount of data, and it can actually help from a security standpoint because it can say, well, this is Mike in New York City, he goes here a lot, we know this is probably Mike, here. And maybe we don't want to give Mike, as he's traveling, full access to all the data, but we want to give him some access depending on the importance of that data. Whereas if I am suddenly in South Africa, maybe that's a warning signal. So I think we look at access to data, and then we look at layered security in terms of devices and location. And I think when you start layering in device and location, you start to be able to build a pretty robust picture of who it is who's accessing the information and what they should be accessing.
So your role, cloud evangelist, but you mentioned mobile. I mean, it seems just as we're talking, very integrated.
Yeah.
Everything is very connected in terms of the broader strategy. Is that what you're experiencing within the financial service system as you're having these conversations?
Yeah. So I think, to look at cloud, or I'll say big data also, I think to look at cloud, big data, and mobile, and maybe even social as different things misses the big picture. I think that it's all of them together. I kind of looked at it as cloud is almost the foundation that you use to enable a mobile enterprise, to enable big data decisions, and to leverage and engage in a social way. So I think you have to look at all of them kind of simultaneously. And it was funny, when I was actually in Germany, and I was, I was on a plane, I was flying from Munich to Basel. And, I got on the plane, and I opened the in-flight magazine. It was in German. I don't speak German, but I was, looking through it. And there was one page that had quotes from around the world. And this one quote jumped out at me, and the quote was, "When I start running first, I appear to be running faster than the others." And I think it's an interesting quote, because if you can look at this big picture thing, and you can leverage cloud as appropriate to build out a successful mobile strategy and give your workers the tools they need to be successful, and use that cloud technology and that infrastructure and that compute power to enable the big data decisions that are going to make, in our industry, help people find alpha, and start to figure out how to, leverage it with social, that's really when you're going to start running faster. And it's going to be very difficult for people to catch up, because unlike technologies of the past, like say mobile banking, for example, it's not a question of building gear or buying software or hiring people. It's a matter of using your team's intellectual property, building better business models, building better algorithms, and then continually fine-tuning them. So what happens is once you start first, it's very, very hard to catch up, because it's the fine-tuning of those models that are getting better every second of every day that really are going to enable that competitive advantage. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so critical people get all in with both, with cloud, big data, everything, because I really think that those who are in it first are going to be running much further and faster ahead than the other folks.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Again, Mike Obel from Microsoft, Cloud Evangelist. Again, join the conversation. Follow us along at NX Analytics on Twitter or on our video blog. We'd love to see your thoughts.